All right, so as Ben has already said, I'll be speaking to you today about how we can innovate with generative AI in a responsible fashion. I want to start by just exploring some of the new types of media that this technology makes possible, also known as synthetic media. We'll then look at how it's starting to impact the media ecosystem and its consumers, and also what the future might look like. And finally, what I'll leave you with is a framework that is designed to help you take a responsible approach to creating synthetic media in your own worlds, whatever your need for it is. For context and to set up an analogy I'll be using quite a lot today, I just want to start with a quick refresher in environmental biology. So as you most certainly know, the natural ecosystem is roughly split across the terrestrial and the aquatic. And at the heart of this ecosystem is its food chain. So this directs the flow of energy throughout it. The sun provides the primary source of this energy. Plants then convert that into food through photosynthesis, a process that is also supported by nutrients from the soil and from minerals. And all of it is regulated by climate. The primary consumers consume plants for their energy. Secondary consumers consume these primary consumers for theirs. And ultimately, they're there to sort of sustain tertiary consumers as well as apex predators. And now typically when synthetic matter enters this natural ecosystem, its composition and volume will determine its impact. Some synthetics, like biodegradables, are designed to have either zero or even a net positive impact on the ecosystem. Others, like persistent organic pollutants, also known as POPs, which include substances like microplastics and pesticides, slowly and invisibly accumulate over time, causing chronic damage in the long run. And then there are toxins, like refined oil and radioactive material, which by way of carelessness or accidents can cause natural disasters that lead to immediate and visible harm. Now, media can also be viewed through an ecosystem lens. In fact, there's a whole academic field of study dedicated to this called media ecology. The ecosystem in the context of media is roughly split across information, entertainment, and social media, or user-generated media in this context, not the platforms. And obviously, it's not this neat in reality. The boundaries between them are heavily blurred. They're all kind of behaving like each other, and most of them also coexist on the same platforms and are kind of consumed in a sort of proverbial media soup. And like its natural counterparts, the media ecosystem also has its own food chain, with attention being its primary source of energy. Just like plants need sunlight to grow, media requires attention to be made. Without it, primary producers or commercial media creators, like journalists, filmmakers, writers, photographers, illustrators, and so on, would have no reason to create it. Their media is consumed by audiences, our primary consumers in this analogy. When audiences engage with content through actions like viewing, liking, commenting, sharing, their attention gets converted into data, which are secondary consumers, the media platforms and outlets then use to sustain themselves and to guide future media creation. They also sell this data to advertisers, arguably the apex predators in this analogy, who then leverage it to promote brands and products. Money, a nutrient in this context, then goes back into the process of creation. This can obviously also happen in a direct transaction between creators and their audiences. And finally, regulation provides the equivalent of climate, setting parameters for what can and can't be done, arguably in a state of its own crises. And now, courtesy of generative AI models and tools, synthetic media is making its way into this ecosystem. And just like their counterparts in nature, these synthetics are also not created equal. I've identified at least 6 types of synthetic media, which we'll look at together now. The first one is interplay, which is the result of highly skilled creators with deep domain expertise using generative AI to push their boundaries and potentially even invent new genres of media and even culture in the process. They typically build their own models and software or hack existing ones in order to maintain control over their creative vision and their outputs. A really great example of this is, of this type of creator in particular, is the musician Holly Herndon, who you can see here in the process of collecting voice data from choirs all over the UK, which she then used to train a custom AI music model for her latest choral-inspired project called The Call. Then we have neural shifters, which are all about moving mood states towards predetermined goals. either chosen by their consumers or detected in their inputs into a service, like this one from Headspace here, for example, which serves meditation content based on what it senses its users need off the back of conversations with them. And ultimately, sensors in wearables are increasingly going to be enabling this type of synthetic media. Then we have AI enhanced, where generative AI is used throughout or for a part of the creation process, usually to expand an expert creator's capabilities or vision. It tends to be a very practical application of the technology, like turning a podcast into another language, finessing a text with a chatbot, visualizing a physics-defying scene in a film, like you can see here, a snippet of Everything Everywhere All at Once, who used Runway AI as part of their VFX kit, personalizing a piece of media for different audiences, and so on. Then we have dupes, which are synthetic entities that imitate existing people or replicate intellectual property, like stories or styles, with or without permission. This is particularly convenient for amateur media creators who may not have a style of their own, or for expert creators without budgets or talent. Dupes of real people or known fictional characters can also be interacted with, as demonstrated by the very fast-growing AI companion market, unfortunately in the news this week for all the wrong reasons, as you might have seen. Then there's content. So much like ultra-processed fast food, this content is deliberately made to be piled high and sold cheaply, engineered to hit all the right pleasure centers. You could argue probably also has the same nutritional value as its namesake, and in turn, theoretically, could also be corrosive when frequently consumed in large quantities. And finally, we have nerve agents, which are essentially mutant versions of mis and disinformation, deliberately or accidentally causing psychological or institutional harm. And even if nerve agents are recognized for what they are or debunked, they can still plant seeds of doubt or new ideas and myths in their consumers' minds. So now that we have a sense of what's possible in synthetic media, let's explore its potential impact on the ecosystem and on its consumers. When I started mapping these typologies onto an impact grid, what struck me was that a pattern emerged around intention, which becomes even clearer when we now overlay their sort of natural world counterparts on top of them. Some synthetic media types, like interplay, neural shifters, select AI enhanced, are clearly developed with the intent to benefit their consumers and positively contribute to the ecosystem, while others, like dupes, content, and nerve agents, are typically driven by the intent to exploit their consumers' attention, thereby risking degrees of ecosystem pollution and harm. And I think when it comes to defining our own intentions for using generative AI to create synthetic media, it's worth remembering that there are minds at the end of the media we create. Minds which have been profoundly shaped by the last cycles of digital and social media, particularly by the recommendation algorithms underpinning them. And I just want to share a very quick snapshot of the state these minds are in. Trust in news institutions is at an all-time low, 31% here in the UK, while 40% of people claim to avoid the news altogether because it negatively impacts their moods. The vast amount of social media's impacts on its users is well documented, although not without contention. Again, something that's a very hot debate circulating in our news ecosystem at the moment. However, things like lack of sleep, stress, depression, anxiety are all on lists of self-reported effects, research that I myself have done over time as well. 50% of 18 to 27-year-olds even wish that the main platforms have never been invented. And even entertainment consumption has been linked to a decrease in well-being. Viewers of the most popular entertainment genres, true crime and reality TV, have reported sleep as well as personal debt issues, respectively, in studies that they've participated in. And given this current situation, I think it's really clear that the foundations meant to cope with this new synthetic media cycle are anything but solid. And yet this is what they're currently having to cope with. Synthetic media has rapidly become ubiquitous across our mostly free and ad-supported platform streams and feeds, none of which were prepared for it, which may not necessarily be a problem if it wasn't for the dominance of dupes, content, and nerve agents, ushering in the so-called post-reality era, where emotional resonance trumps authenticity. And admittedly, it's not without its moments of, captivating weirdness and amusements, but it becomes problematic in situations where reality needs reliable representation. And noticeably, a lot of it is also very high in emotional intensity, more dopamine hits, more stress triggers, more simulated connections, all of which could potentially overwhelm their consumers' psychological capacities. And with 7 hours of daily media consumption being the norm, that's a lot of potential for repeat exposure. And this matters because this matters when we consider how what happens online has a way of impacting the real world too. As the authors of Meme Wars put it, ideas in digital media travel from the wires to the weeds. On an individual level, they ripple from one person to another. On a societal and cultural level, they can divide communities as much as they can bond them. And on a broader level, they have the potential to send shockwaves across the systems that govern our world, exemplified here by the stock market's reaction to a deepfake image of the Pentagon on fire last year. But the good news is we're only just at the start of this new media cycle. In theory, there's still time to deliberate the kind of ecosystem we want to operate in and the choices that we want to make about its future. Remember, by its very nature, synthetic media is engineered by people like us who are putting generative AI models and tools to use. So how do we ensure that what we do with them contributes to a preferable ecosystem? Let's look at the natural world again for some inspiration. So in nature, a sick ecosystem can be returned to its baseline state through regenerative practices like the removal of contaminants and pollutants or the reintroduction of healthy elements on a degraded site, as you can see here. But restoring ecosystem health is only the first step. To maintain it, sustainable practices need to be established too. Careful resource management, biodiversity protection, controlled development, all of which ensure the ecosystem remains healthy and resilient, and thereby enabling, rather than risking, long-term value creation for those who are reliant on it. And so I think this next cycle of media gives us that opportunity to do the same. So to first regenerate and then to sustain our ecosystem's health. And to that end, I developed the Sustainable Synthetics Framework, which is made up of 2 categories of practices. The first is about due diligence on anatomy models, on the anatomy of generative AI models and tools that we introduce into our organizations. And the second one addresses the creation process and how we can shape intentional applications of it. And by anatomy, what I mean is what lies beneath the very simple-looking prompt boxes of our generative AI tools. So its full infrastructure, including its supply chain and life cycle. And as you are undoubtedly also aware of, this anatomy is currently riddled with a lot of issues. These include environmental issues such as the data centers, obviously the backbone of generative AI, of this technology, their insatiable energy demands and water usage, as well as their carbon emissions, are now finally, we're able to sort of to see the extent of it. It's all now laid out in the open. There are social issues as well, like labor displacement and exploitation, bias perpetuation through models, training data and outputs, and finally a raft of governance and legal issues related to model opacity. So you might have heard AI systems being referred to as black boxes, IP and copyright infringements related to training data, again, as well as also to the outputs of tools, as well as data privacy and security risks pertaining to both these levels as well. Now, luckily, the market is responding with solutions and alternatives, like protecting creator IP and sharing revenues, like Exactly and 11AI are doing, mitigating training data theft, promoting model transparency, particularly through things like open source access, and also building tools that prove authenticity. Even greening AI, although not without its controversies, has seen substantial investments as of late through alternative energy sources, including nuclear power. Projects seem to be underway. They certainly have received quite a lot of money and investment over the last couple of weeks. So when it comes to our framework then, due diligence on generative AI's anatomy entails upskilling teams in responsible AI principles, especially those involved in decisions about suppliers and implementation, and those who will be using models and tools to create media. audits in which you scrutinize your suppliers' practices from their environmental impact to labor conditions and data sourcing, and in turn working out how this aligns with your company's own ESG principles, policies, as well as ethics codes. How also within an evolving regulatory framework can you make relationships with these suppliers work? In turn, then making, obviously, once you've done all of this, then making a choice on who to buy from and partner with. And when it comes to the media creation side of things, it's actually been really heartening to see a raft of prolific ideas emerge across the ecosystem as well, seeking to restore trust, distribute gains more equitably, and also to elevate diverse voices. And moreover, these are proving that media businesses can also be sustainable without relying on degenerative advertising models, choosing instead to build value through community ownership and direct funding from audiences, or even new breeds of institutional investors. Some early case studies even demonstrate how generative AI can be a force for good in the media ecosystem. The Boring Report is an app that uses generative AI as a way of desensationalizing news headlines and stories. A recent experiment that was published from MIT Sloan used chatbots to combat conspiracy theories, reducing participants' belief in their chosen conspiracy by 20%, which is a start. And Pinterest, in a wider bid to improve their users' emotional well-being, quote the CEO of Pinterest, now enables search by body type, made possible with generative AI as well. So back to our framework then. When it comes to creation, we could be guided by 3 practices. The first one is about mind safety, so prioritizing minds over clicks when creating synthetic media, focusing on delivering genuine value over opportunism. Ideally, you would also evolve your KPIs to reflect this and to hold you accountable to it. Collaboration, so resisting the urge to hand over creative tasks to AI just because it's easier and cheaper and faster, and instead preserving the craft skills and original ideas that makes our media ecosystem diverse. This entails domain experts treating AI as a collaborator or novel creative material, but ultimately remaining in charge of their visions. And finally, inclusion. So on the one hand, ensuring synthetic media truly represents our world and that of your audiences, the diversity of experiences, representations, and voices. It should also, however, serve real audiences' needs rather than just caving to the dominant platform's incessant demands for high-volume output. And I think the balance has been off for a very long time in the media ecosystem as a consequence of this. And it's time to understand again what it is that our audiences want and need from the media that we create. Ultimately, I don't think that this is just about responsible media innovation for its own sake or solely for your consumers' benefit. I really think it's about restoring and shaping a future media ecosystem that works better for everyone in the long run, consumers, creators, as well as a whole raft of disciplines of creativity. Developers, regulators, and ultimately the businesses that make it all possible. And on that note, I hope I honored your attention. Thank you very much for your time.